Peter Breen, thank you for joining us on the Illinois channel.
Hey, thanks for having me, Terry.
Well, a lot of people will remember that you were, until just recently, a former or a state representative, and now you are back to practicing law full time, but you're also taking on another project that we have heard of in the past, and you're making another round of it, and that is trying to have the so-called fair maps and redrawing the political districts. Give us a lowdown of what's behind this effort and what are you trying to achieve?
Well, and during my 4 years in the state legislature, one thing I saw was there's an establishment that is preventing a lot of good government measures from being considered in the General Assembly and then from passing and getting to the governor's desk. And so as part of my duties, I'm looking at going, why is this? I've lived here for decades, and so it's a constant problem. And so I looked at all of the things, and of course Madigan is kind of the focus of this, but there's a whole establishment. He's maybe the leader of it, but there's a whole group of people that really are stomping on reform. They're stopping the ability of the people to do what they want. And I looked into the causes. And of course, there are various things. There's money, there's various interest groups and all of that. But at its heart is this ability to redraw the maps, because that takes, plenty of states across the country and at the federal level, what have you, there are plenty of people who have political organizations and they have power and they've got money and all of this. But the thing that takes it from being an occasional control of the government to a permanent and usually supermajority control of the government is the ability to redraw those maps every 10 years. And so I looked at that and said, boy, that is the place where you've got to make a change. And so I had introduced a measure in 2018 to change the Illinois Constitution through the legislative process, to put that on the ballot for the people. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, because why would Madigan and his cronies allow that? Because I think they probably realized the same thing I did, just that is the critical key, the linchpin, as I call it, of their ability to maintain power essentially permanently. And so I've now gone back and said, hey, by which the people of Illinois can amend their constitution. The last time we did it was in 1980. You'll remember Pat Quinn's cutback amendment, when they reduced the size of the Illinois House, changed the way the districts are drawn and voted on. And so what we have in that narrow window is the ability to do redistricting reform. And so that is where, that's really where I'm focused right now as the most effective place, and really our only place that we, the people, can come in and try to upend and eject these folks that have been controlling our state now for decades.
Let's cover a couple of issues as fast as we can, because we're going to be respectful of your time. When Governor Rauner got this on the amendment to redraw the maps, the state Supreme Court then threw it out as being unconstitutional. What changes are you making to avoid your effort, should you get it passed by the people, to be not ruled unconstitutional?
Well, and here was the problem. There were many people of goodwill that were part of the prior efforts. So what we've done is looked at the legal cases, looked at some of the issues that were really surfaced by those prior efforts. The difficulty of the prior efforts were they were bringing in people like the Auditor General, they were bringing in the Supreme Court to do new things, and so they were creating a lot of new duties and a lot of it was relatively complex. So what we've done now is to say, look, we've now got the benefit of numerous court decisions, and the one point in all of these court decisions, it's either conceded expressly, so it's ruled expressly, or impliedly, that redistricting is a valid subject of the court, of this process. So the courts acknowledge that redistricting can be done through constitutional amendment. We've just got to draft it properly. So what I did was I said, when I was starting this, I consulting with advisors and people all over the place, they said, now, Peter, we're with you, but if you are going to be asking the people of Illinois to put their blood, sweat, and tears into this great effort of getting all of these signatures and going through all this trouble, you darn well better make sure it passes legal muster. And so, as part of that, I said, everyone's got an idea. Well, why don't we have this person do this, or why don't we have this do that? And the problem is every bit of complexity you add to an amendment increases the chance that it could be struck from the ballot by the courts. So I took the simplest possible approach. You do a bipartisan commission. Each side gets, you get 3 House members, 3 Senate members from each of the caucuses. It's the same model as the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which actually works pretty well in Springfield. It's one of the few things that does work well in Springfield. And there's a critical key. Members of both parties have to agree on the final map. And you do that, you put all of that together. That can be done under the current understanding of the case law. And really, there's no objection that can be raised legally, at least none in good faith, to that particular way of drafting it. And so that really is what we did. We made it as simple and clean as possible. And what that does, and sure, everyone's got ideas. Well, I'd rather have it done this way or that way. But look, what I can guarantee you is this one passes legal muster, and it guarantees a map that is infinitely fairer than a map drawn by Mike Madigan sitting in a room by himself.
I'm bringing up the website for if people want to go and look at it and get a little more information. Let me ask one thing. A couple of things I can imagine people would ask. One, let me go to on your funding. How are you funding this effort? How much money do you think it needs to raise? Before Governor Rauner, of course, money wasn't an object, but you have to get quite a lot of signatures, as I recall, and then I believe it would have to be put on, if you get enough, then that would put it on the, I'm trying to recall the process, that puts it on the ballot for November of 2020, is that right?
Right, and so you need roughly 360,000 signatures between here and, they've got to be filed about May 1st. So you've got a few months.
It has to be like 6
so.
months before the election, before the November election.
Correct. Yes, and so that's what, we've got some time.
So am I
and
right
the way
that
I broke it down.
I'm sorry, Peter. Am I right that we don't need the legislature because it's the 360,000 signatures of the people will put it on the ballot? Is that correct?
Right. This is the only way. So this amendment is really, it's using a very narrow window allowed solely to the people under the Illinois Constitution. And you've got to get 8% of the people that voted in the last gubernatorial election. And so that number comes out to about 360,000 people.
And as we
actually, I had broken it down. I'll tell you. I said, that's a big number, but if you get 36,000 people to fill up one sheet of 10 signatures, you're done. And 36,000 people is a lot of people, but out of 13 million, you're telling me we can't have some small percentage of the total population of Illinois that number of people are not interested enough in seeing some real significant change to go out and just get 10 signatures.
Out of curiosity, could theoretically, do all those signatures, do they have to be geographically dispersed, or could they all come from Cook County? Isn't it?
Well, if the good people of Cook County want to be the ones that they're the only ones that sign it, then that could be fine. But I think it doesn't have to be geographically dispersed. But boy, from the inquiries and all the interest I'm seeing, it's people all the way from Murfreesboro to Rockford to the city of Chicago. Folks all across the state are very interested in seeing the mapping process change.
Let me ask too. I can imagine somebody is going to say, here's Peter Breen, who lost his election trying to argue that the legislative elections aren't competitive and that we need to change the system. So what's the answer to that? Not to make it about you, but we just had like 50 new lawmakers come in. So some people I can imagine are going to say it's a lame argument to say that we don't have competitive races when we just had the largest freshman class of lawmakers come in, to my knowledge, in history.
Well, and I would say this, the 2018 election is an example of why you need fair maps. So in 2018, in the suburban areas, people wanted to elect Democrats. They were angry at the president, and maybe they were also angry at some other leaders on the Republican side that were in our area, and the people were able to throw out the Republicans and bring in a bunch of Democrats, at least in the suburbs. Downstate, they're a little more on the Republican side because of the Trump effect. Well, so that's the right thing. The people should be able to toss out a whole party if they don't want them to run the state. The difficulty is, under our current maps, if the people of the state wanted to then toss out the Democrats, they can't bring in the Republicans because there are too many Democrats focused in each district to allow for the undecided folks, the people in the middle, the independents, to elect the legislators of their choice. So that's really the thing. So that's great. If you want to bring in a whole group of Democrats, you can do that under the current map. The problem is when the people of the state say, hey, we want to give the Republicans a try, they don't have that opportunity. That's not democracy. So that's really my answer there. Yeah, I mean, again, that the 2018 is an example of what should occur. Just when it's time for the people who want Republicans, because occasionally they do, they don't have that opportunity in Illinois.
Yeah, I know just not only in Illinois, but in other states we have the same problem. Just to be clear, this would, if you were successful, redraw not just the state legislative maps and the state Senate maps, but also the congressional maps for Illinois. Is that right?
Well, and so the congressional maps are drawn by statute. So this would not technically change that. But I've got to tell you, the fact that you've got a whole new legislature that are elected under a fair map process, I would imagine that new legislature would select congressional districts in the same manner. Because otherwise, you would be ignoring the will of the people. So it's not technically that way. Our state constitution really only deals with map drawing for the state legislators, not the congressional. And I would say one of the reasons for that is there had been a thought of what the U.S. Constitution requires. That thought has now changed with relatively recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions that allow for bipartisan commissions, like the ones that we would be creating with the Fair Maps Illinois effort.
And the other thing is, for those who might fear, I remember Governor Rauner, let me say this, pointing out, and accurately, I forget the exact number, but he was trying to illustrate how the current maps, or those that are drawn by political leaders instead of a bipartisan commission as you're proposing, results in legislative districts being so lopsided, either so lopsided Republican or lopsided in the Democratic side, that a candidate from the opposing party frequently doesn't really have a legitimate chance to be elected. And what Governor Rauner was pointing out is, in one of the recent elections, it might have been 2016, I'm not sure, but that a fair number of the legislative races, the people had no opponent in the general election. I don't know if you know those numbers offhand, or to what extent you thought that was also true.
Well, and that is a good point. And so either these districts are being drawn in such a way that literally it's just not even worth the other party putting a candidate up, or you put up a lightweight because you just, if it's going to be a 20-point loss, well, for heaven's sakes, you can't get a quality candidate to put themselves forward all for the sake of, well, hey, maybe I could lose by 10 instead of by 20 like the last person did. So really that is a critical factor. So if you make it a bipartisan commission, well, then both parties have similar but entirely opposing aims. The Democrats want to maximize their number of seats in the legislature. The Republicans want to maximize their number of seats. So what happens is you maximize the number of competitive districts, and you get some real choice in your elections right now. That's what would happen if you do Fair Maps Illinois.
Based upon, we won't keep you much longer here, but based upon your own experience in the legislature, and remind people, how long were you in the legislature?
So I was in for 4 years, and certainly, I've been involved in the legislative process for at least 10 or more. In politics for about 25 years.
So if this came about, or let's say, what was your experiences where I was going to in the legislature? Do you have some reason to think that this would cut down on the hyper-partisanship that's in the legislature, or would it not have any kind of an impact? Would we get more done? Would we have more cooperative work between the Democrats and the Republicans in there, or do you Or do you think that that wouldn't necessarily matter, that it's just a better way of offering choice to the voters?
Well, I would say this. So if you've got a lot of districts where it's hard one way or the other, well, then you're tending to elect legislators that are hard, Republican or Democrat. And so if you make your districts more evenly balanced, that will cause you to have a group of legislators who they've got to be more responsive to their voters, which probably means they're going to have to take account of both sides. They've got to really respond to the independent voters in their districts. And so, what voters always tell us, they say, hey, we want you to do stuff. We want you to get things done in a more compromised and bipartisan manner. So I would hope that would help us to really bring ourselves together, and it would reward that effort of working together, compromising in a thoughtful way, instead of right now, if you do too much compromising, and then all of a sudden, I heard from so many Democratic legislators who maybe by nature were more moderate, but in their party it had gone so far to the left that they said, well, I can't come with you on that. I can't even talk to you about that. That maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago, Democrats would have been perfectly willing to accept, but they're sitting there worried about a primary challenge in this day and age, and so they were unable to compromise. If you get evenly balanced districts, you have to do more of that compromise.
Yeah, and I've heard the same lament from so many people, that we're in these primaries. If the primary is basically a fait accompli to election, and you don't even have a general election opponent, well, then you're going to, as you were saying, you're going to be competing on who can be the most liberal or who can be the most conservative, depending upon what you're running, and so you end up with a legislative body of extremes.
And this is another thing in Illinois. You end up with somebody that is going to be beholden to their party leadership because they need that money, they need to clear that primary.
Right.
But if you've got someone that's got to win a general election, well, they have there are plenty of times when there are certain people in Springfield, they say, well, can you come with me on this particular issue? And they say, hey, my district, my race, I need to be more independent. I need to flex back and forth. And so you get more of that, and you're going to get more done at the end of the day.
We've had the website up, and for people who want to find out, and if they want to get involved, I guess there's some way that I believe they can download a signature sheet on that. I know sometimes too, whether you're signing them off for a candidate or something, they're going to be often challenged. So people have to be careful when they do get those signatures, that they get both the signature, and then people have to write out their names and put what county they're in and all that kind of stuff, because otherwise they'll be challenged. 360,000. We didn't. I don't think we got how are you financing this effort?
Oh, the financing. Well, so far we're starting with grassroots effort. I'm using my own campaign funds to help with the effort to start. We're talking with some folks, but I really. I didn't want to start with this model of, hey, go talk to some rich people and then get their permission and then start. No, let the people show that they're interested, and then you bring in the funds. But you've got to start with real energy first. And I think for a lot of people, I talk to them and they say, well, I've been despairing over Illinois. I'm just, I've got my family moving out, my friends moving out, my kids are going to college out of state and they're not coming back. So I want to tap into that energy of the people for reform first, and then we'll bring in the money. The money flows in. That's something we're going to be able to do. And so that's the place though, is really the energy of the people. And I'll tell you, you go to the website. I would just challenge anybody that's interested in doing this. Just go to the website, print out that petition sheet. It's double-sided, so you set your printer for double-sided, and be the first signature. Just do that today. Print it out and sign it. Just start there. We ask folks to commit to get 10 signatures, but frankly, just commit to get one today. Those of you who are watching who are at all interested in this, I think you're going to feel great about it. It's an effort that really can bring a lot of people together. And then I've said this too, Terry. If we can literally do what would be the greatest good government reform in the history of the state, what can't we do? We've got debt problems. We've got partisanship problems. We've got huge problems all over the place. But what can't we do if we do this?
Well, Peter Breen, we know there have been many people on both sides of the aisle, and I know from covering the last effort, that are very much in favor of this. There's Democrats in favor, Republicans in favor. We did one day a number of years ago, the Paul Simon Institute went up to Chicago and had a full day seminar at the Union League Club that we covered on this very issue. So it is, while you're a Republican, former Republican member, I know there's a lot of support for this on both sides of the aisle. Peter, before we let you go, is there anything else about this issue we haven't talked about that you want to mention?
Well, there is an interesting point, which is Chicago's own former president, Barack Obama, has begun a national redistricting initiative. Now, he's focusing his efforts on the Republican-controlled states. But my goodness, the fact that we would have the rest of the country do this when our own former president wants it done across the country, it's a perfect time to do it here in Illinois. And so it is one of the few times that I agree with our former president that redistricting is something that needs to be done. And so why not start it here at home?
Well, as we say, I know I've heard from many people on both sides of the aisles over the year that this is supported across the board. So we can have people from all across Illinois hopefully take a listen to what you're saying, and they can go to the website and get involved if they so wish. But we appreciate it. It was good to see you again. Good luck to you, and hopefully we can catch up with you again in the near future.
Hey, thank you, Terry.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.